Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Casual Commentators. Today, I've got something a little special for you. This is let me get my water, I just chucked that at the screen. So, now, what it's going to be is, there's this movie, this little thriller made by the people who made the Final Destination 2, right? It's called Butterfly Effect. It came out in 2004, same year as the best comic book movie ever made, Spider-Man 2. Now, this Butterfly Effect, it's a little bit of a... A little bit of controversy surrounding the movie in the sense that, for me personally, there's controversy that I have created by myself around this movie in the sense that it has a 33% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, if you know me, and if you've talked to me about movies, ever, or TV shows, you know that I hate Rotten Tomatoes. I hate it so much. And the fact that this movie was given a 33% really ticked me off. And I was like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm sick of it. I'm putting a stand. I'm taking a stand. And so today, you get to see the hill that I die on against Rotten Tomatoes. One thing I want to point out really quick, the IMDb rating for this is 7.7, which I think is a much better reflection of the quality of this film than a 33%. Another thing that I want to note is that this is a defense, not necessarily a film review. So while I will be touching on aspects of the plot and things like that, I'm not going to be going through like film flaws or things I liked. I'm just going to be talking about the strengths and the weaknesses and why I think that this deserves, and through that, why I think that this deserves a better rating than 33%. And then at the end, I'll give a rating that I think it is equal to. Right, so the first thing, right off the bat, that I want to mention is the pacing of this movie. It's so fast-paced. It's incredible, really, how consistently fast-paced this is. It's throughout the entire movie. The runtime of this film is about an hour 53. And not a single second of it feels dull to me. You know, the opening scene, for example, you're thrown right into it. You have Ashton Kutcher, he's breaking into a door, he's coming on the ground, there's people chasing him. I don't know what's going on, it's crazy. I'm excited, I'm intrigued as to what is happening, you know. And then that pacing sort of, as I mentioned, maintained throughout the movie, which I think did a number of things. One, it really kept me interested. It kept me intrigued. I was like, my brain needs to be turned all the way on in order to keep up with what's going on, you know? Because if I blink, I'll miss something. And while that sort of is a bad thing to some movies, I think this one really benefited by it. Another reason why I think the pacing is one of the biggest strengths of this film is it hit a lot of the flaws. That sounded weird coming out of my mouth. It hit a lot of the flaws that I noticed on my second viewing. Now, this is strictly on my first viewing. The pacing hid a lot of the bad acting from Ashton Kutcher. It hid some of the things about the plot that didn't really make any sense. Some of the narrative confusion that I'll get into later. And I think that's good. You want a movie that doesn't linger on its mistakes or the aspects of it that aren't exactly as well done as others. And this movie is so quick that you can't focus on things. You're moving. We're moving. We're moving. Nope. Another thing about this movie. Another aspect about this movie that's good is the premise. So the premise of this film is a young boy, Evan Treborn, suffers these blackouts during significant moments in his life. Things that are super high stress inducing. He blacks out, can't remember it. And when he's in college, he realizes that if he goes back through these journals that he wrote, he can sort of relive those high stress moments and not black out. He relives the moment during the blackout. And through that, oh, that was wet. He's able to sort of tamper with his own timeline. He'll tamper with events in the past, and then we'll see how it affects the future. This is where the name comes from, the butterfly effect. Sort of the chaos theory where a butterfly across one side of the universe will flap its wings, and then a monsoon will be created on the other side of the world. Sort of... I know there's a video game that a lot of people played, Until Dawn, where this effect was the premise as well. You know, you had these choices and they would affect the rest of the plot. It's very simple. However, it's very intriguing because with this premise, you're engaged the entire time. I was engaged the entire time. I was interested because I was like, I would never know what was going to happen. Everything was so unpredictable because, I mean, him picking up a pencil in the past could result in an apocalypse in the future. With that premise, you have unlimited opportunities, and the movie did a lot of things right in terms of choices, in terms of utilizing that premise to its full effect. Some movies have great ideas, but they don't execute on them as as well as they could, and The Butterfly Effect really does a commendable job of utilizing its premise to its full extent, in the sense of having things in the past greatly affect the future. Nice job, Ben. Good job. So, the third strength of this film is the score. And when I say score, I'm not a film major, ladies and gentlemen. I don't go to film school. I don't know the terms and the terminology. So when I say score, I'm going to need you to bear with me for a second, because soundtrack, score, sounds that are musical, they all sort of correlate. So I'm going to try to articulate this the best way I can. So my thing with scores or soundtracks in films is that the main purpose is to uplift scenes. It's to emphasize the tone, and not to override. A lot of scores will be too much for the scene. They'll override what's going on. They'll override the plot, the narrative that's being covered, and it's too distracting. This movie does a phenomenal job of being simplistic in its score, effective and impactful, and a huge assist to the acting. I mean, well, the bad acting. I mean, it covers, again, with the pacing, it hits some of the flaws. But I think that there was some really good emotional beats that the score emphasized on. And that's, I mean, it's very simple. It's only like a piano. It's very simple, but it's extremely effective. And I wanted to keep that in the main strengths of this film, because when you watch this, I think that you'll agree with me, the simplistic and simple moments, simplistic and simple, same exact thing. Haha, I'm stupid. The moments where there are those little piano, that's not how it is. They're just good, and they're commendable. And I wanted to include it as strengths because it really changes your viewing experience, because and this I'll sort of get into a little bit later. I don't think that this movie is a sci-fi thriller. I think it succeeds much more as a drama, and the score really plays into that. While there are some really high, tense moments in the film, I don't think that that's enough to be considered a thriller. I think that this movie is very emotional and very sentimental, and succeeds much more as a drama thanks to the score. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be honest with you. I've tried to film this a couple times. I've tried to film this defense a couple times, and for whatever reason, I am finding myself having a difficult time articulating my thoughts on this film. I have a couple post-it notes right here, literally with all I want to say, but for whatever reason, I can't say them. Every time I try to talk, I'm yawning. Right, so the acting. I know I just said twice that bad acting was something that sort of plagued this film, but that's really only because of Ashton Kutcher. And it's only on display in a couple scenes. But the acting from a lot of the supporting cast is really good. And one person in particular, the girl who plays Kaylee, Amy Smart, does a phenomenal job. And the reason why I include acting as strengths, even though I just bashed on it, is because along with the premise, these actors have to have such a dynamic range to cover any contingency. I mean, there was one example where Amy Smart was playing a sorority girl, and she plays a very convincing, very believable sorority girl, and then there's another where she has to play a prostitute. She plays very convincing, very real, and the fact that she's able to authentically and genuinely play extremely different characters, I think that that's commendable. I think that's fantastic. I will note, once I get into the weaknesses acting is again on there, because there's some examples where I'm like, you didn't really do a lot. But with Amy Smart in particular, it was phenomenal. It was really good. And I know, here's the thing. I enjoy making reviews, and this isn't a review, but discussing movies in a more critical manner, because, and I was watching a Taylor J. Williams video, and he perfectly articulated this. It's hard to discuss things that you enjoyed without droning on, and sounding like, oh, this is good, I loved it. And I don't want this to be that, but at points, if this does seem like that, I'm just going to apologize in advance. Moving right along, I want to talk about the interesting explanation to some of the moments in the plot. And this is sort of, it's a small, there's small details. But there's a couple examples where there's some really, I want to use the word fun, but it's not really fun. It's really cool payoffs. So, in the beginning, when we're first introduced to these characters, and when Evan is like a 13-year-old boy, and he's experienced all these blackouts and going through, there's moments where it's just a bit weird. There was a drawing that he made, and it was like about him murdering people, and we don't really get an explanation to it. There's a moment where he's holding a knife in the kitchen. We don't get an explanation to it. But as the movie progresses, and as we see Ashton Kutcher go back in time, we get answers to why those happened. The reason why he was holding the knife was to try to maybe destroy the TNT at Kaylee and Tommy's house. The reason that he drew the picture, that still wasn't necessarily explained. But it's cool to know that was because of Ashton Kutcher in the future going back into the past. I thought that was interesting. It raises a couple questions. In the sense that it's sort of a paradoxical situation. And not to knock the film, because we're in the strength side, but the more that I think about it, the more it doesn't necessarily make sense to have... It's just, the more I think about it, the weirder it is that he goes back in time to do it, but then it's shown in the beginning. But that hurts my brain to think about. If you see the movie and you try to think about it, I think you'll understand what I'm saying, but man, I'm just gonna cut that out. Whew! So this movie is an R-rated film. And with that, it covers some very adult and mature themes, some subject matter. There's drug paraphernalia. There's, as I mentioned, prostitution. But the movie handles everything well. And it handles it in a very gentle sense, and one that isn't too gratuitous, you know. It serves a purpose as opposed to just being there. The prostitution was a result of Evan's decision, and it was a consequence. And I think it's interesting that the people who made Final Destination 2 really were this intentional with their use of some of the subject matter. Because if you've seen Final Destination 2, there's some pretty gory and, you know, shock value deaths that are in there. And not to say that there weren't shocking moments in this that were gory. Well, there's not really gore, but I'll get into it. But their usage of all of this adult material and themes was in a very intentional manner that served the plot. And I think that's, as everything on this strengths, is commendable. Whew. All right. So getting back to the pacing of the film. With the extremely quick pacing, there was little to no filler. And this applies to more TV shows, and so I don't know if it's a really good comparison or a good point to make, but I just want to say that movies that have scenes or moments that just don't fit, you're just wondering why did they put that in there. This movie has none of that. Every line, every detail, every scene is integral to the plot and moves the plot forward in a logical manner. And that's refreshing because it's, you know, it sustains my interest. It doesn't waste my time. It utilizes my time. I think that additionally helped hide a little bit of the flaws that the movie had in the acting and then the making sense department, because everything flowed into the next thing. Again, with the pacing, you didn't have time to really analyze and linger on the bad stuff because you're like, look, I gotta snap into the next scene or else I'm gonna miss something. This is such a bad defense. Now, I do want to point out that this movie was not a bomb at the box office. The budget was $13 million, and it grossed over 80 million in domestic and worldwide. So that's a success in my book, because if you factor in the marketing, which is about double the budget, or which is about equal to the budget, so it's 26 mil. Even if it's 30, that's still a $50 million game, which I think is why they made 2 sequels. I haven't seen them. I can't speak for them. I've heard that they are not of good quality and that they're not in the same caliber as the first film. But it's a successful movie financially. That's what I'm trying to say here. Even with a bad rating, not critically acclaimed, it was a successful film. Now, I do want to talk about the tension and the stakes. So, the main premise, as I've touched on before, is a butterfly effect film. If you do something in the past, it affects the present. And so that, I think, greatly enhances the stakes of the film. Because if Evan fucks something up in the past, who knows what it's going to do in the future? I mean, we've seen examples of where he's quadriplegic, Kaylee's a prostitute. There's a hell of a lot of things that can go wrong. And so I think that the stakes in this film are very real, they're very genuine, and there's huge consequences. And the directors and the screenwriters and everyone, they make a point to show the consequences. Similarly to Spider-Man 2, everything has consequences. And so I also want to take on the tension side of things. The camera work and the score, as I mentioned before, they help to enhance the experience. I mean, the scenes where he's going into the doctor's office and he's breaking down the doors and he's trying, it's incredibly, it's a close-up, it's a shaky cam, it's so tense. I don't really have any other words to say other than that, because every time I try to film this I get incredibly tired. But the movie does a good job at creating real tension and real stakes, and I think that that's important. So I do feel that it is imperative to mention the weaknesses of the film in order to fairly and justly evaluate and defend it. This film's not perfect. It's not a perfect film. One of the biggest weaknesses falls, unfortunately, on Ashton Kutcher. He has some really just awkward moments where I'm like, Ashton, are you acting? Do you know how to act, Ashton? But again, this was really... I only really noticed this on my second viewing. The first viewing, the pacing really helped move past a lot of his bad acting and his weird choices. But the second viewing, it was pretty noticeable. And so I do have to say that one of the weaknesses is it's a bit... At times, I'm like, Ashton, what are you doing? That was gross. I'm going to cut that out. The second, and this is actually the last weakness that I have, but it's broken up into a couple parts. Narrative confusion. I touched on it before. I'm going to elaborate on it now. So, there's just a couple things in the plot that are weird to me. They don't make a whole lot of sense. One of them is that the main reason why Evan continuously jumps back in time is to save Kaylee and give her a life that she's happy with. You know, and where she's happy, and it's all good for her. Because when Evan finds the journals, he's like, oh shoot, I have to go back to my hometown and see Kaylee and talk to her. And when he does, he realizes that her life has been sort of stunted. She's still in the same environment, still the same atmosphere, and she hasn't really grown that much, and she's unhappy with it. And unfortunately, she actually does later that night, I believe, kill herself. And so that sort of instigates Evan's motivations to go back in time and change things. But the problem here, the reason why it's somewhat not believable, is because it's also established in the movie that there's a 7-year time jump between when Evan leaves his hometown and when he returns. You know, there's a 7-year time, 7 years in between. And I think it's important to notice that he didn't reach out to her. He didn't talk to her. He didn't try to visit her in that 7 years. Yet the second that, you know, he goes back in time, sees his memory, it's all he can think about, and he risks his life many times for someone that he hasn't thought about in 7 years. I just think that was interesting. Maybe, I mean, look, here's the thing. Maybe it's old memories resurfaced, and that sort of fueled his motivations more. Sure, I'll concede to that. But it's just not really entirely believable that someone that hasn't been in his life for 7 years, regardless of their previous relationship, would have this much of an effect, you know? I don't know. The other thing, I feel like Evan's dad could have been fleshed out a little bit more, purely in order to maybe ground the, because it's what the whole time jumping based on looking at his journals, his father could do that too. And so I just thought that it could have been fleshed out and grounded a little bit more, maybe a little bit more explanation on how you do it and sort of what it does to you. And that leads me into my last sort of weakness, is the effect of the time traveling. So it's noted a couple times, because Evan goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, there's severe hemorrhaging in your brain because there's an influx of memories, and every time that Evan does come back from traveling in time, it bleeds severely from his nose. So it's like, but then he's fine. Then he's like walking, and there's really no visible toll on his body the more he goes back. And so I think that was a missed opportunity with the stakes a little bit. Every time Evan goes back, there's a chance that he'll damage himself irreparably. But that's not really touched upon. That's like, sure, he bleeds a lot from his nose, but it's not something that is stopping him, because then he does it again and again. So those were the weaknesses. I probably could think of a couple more narrative things, but yeah, I don't think that this is a 33% movie. I'd honestly give this probably a 7.5, 7 to 7.5, in that range. I think that's where this movie fits solidly. The cinematography most of the time isn't crazy. It's just reaction shot. That's it, really. But yeah, that's my defense. I'd say go watch this movie for yourself. Make up your own mind. It's definitely a good watch, definitely interesting, and definitely not a 33%. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll start on Riverdale. We'll see how that goes. Catch you cats later.